Hello everyone, Sabai Jatinala. So today in the first video, I would like to start with the concept of object-oriented programming. Uh, the concept of object-oriented programming comes from the drawback that we had with the procedural-oriented programming language. We already are aware of what is a procedural-oriented programming language like C programming. In this concept, of object oriented programming, as from the name itself, object oriented means everything is viewed in terms of object. So if we go back to the history, that is what is given in the syllabus. If you go back to the history, we'll see that there were requirements for designing programs for real world problems. If you are aware of what is real world problems, the problems which we are facing in day-to-day life, like for example, if you want to write a software for booking a railway ticket or a banking system or say a university, then these are the real world problems. So the procedural oriented programming were not very much suited for real world problems. The reason behind is it could not actually implement the concept of objects in the program. Like for example, if we say a banking system, in a banking system, customer is an object because it has features, and then we could not make that concept of objects in procedural oriented programming. So it was a little bit problematic, though you could write a program, but it was not aligning with the real concept of the real world problems. So this actually, there are a lot of reasons behind uh, why we need object oriented programming, but this was the initial requirements why we need real world object oriented programming for solving real world problems. And the I hope you are aware of what is an object. Everything we see around is an object. And one very important thing is every object will have some features. Features are those data. Like for example, if you talk about this computer, a computer is an object. So if you have the features are is the price and and the model, everything. So if you consider one particular student as an object, the features uh, student of the student object are the name and roll number, marks, and all that. So we needed a programming language, a trend, concept which would actually allow us to view these objects in a programming language. That gave rise to the concept of object-oriented programming. So if you want to know what is programming, if you're not aware of what is a program, it's a set of instructions written in some language. Like initially we had what you call the machine language, which was written in the forms of ones and zeros. And then since we could not write programs in the forms of ones zeros, then we upgraded to assembly language programming. Assembly language programming were also uh, you know mm, uh, we could write programs in assembly language program, but also it was not that easy. So people shifted to structured programmings like C programming languages. And then people could write programs in structured languages like C language. Then we had these concepts of object-oriented programming for real world, like structured programming for languages where which could solve only the scientific problems. Like for example, if you have some scientific problems, and then we could write programs using this structured programming languages or procedure oriented programming languages. So now the real need was uh, we wanted to design a concept that would allow us to write programs for real world problems. So an object-oriented programming is just a programming approach, to be very precise. It has features starting from the concept of objects, then classes. If you're, I hope you're aware of what is a class. It's a group of if we group a set of objects, then that will give you a class. Of course, similar objects, like for example, a group of students will give you a class, and you can name that class. And then a group of customers will give you one class. A group of animals will give you a class. A group of birds will give you a class. So all these concepts, all these features are there in the object-oriented programming concepts. So object-oriented programming is a concept that will be followed by number of programming languages. So it is just a concept. This is what you have to be very clear. This is just a concept. We will be dealing with one programming language which follows the concept of object-oriented programming paradigm. C++ happens to be one of the programming languages. Of course, there are other languages also like Java, C hash. These are the programming languages which also follow the concept of object-oriented programming. There are other features of object-oriented programming which we will be dealing in detail. Inheritance is one. Then we have you can see polymorphism, then data hiding, encapsulation, overloading, reusability. We'll discuss each one of them in detail. If we are to know what is data hiding, see, there is a very special feature that we have in object-oriented programming, which we didn't have in procedural-oriented programming, because the main idea behind object-oriented programming is to give importance to data, unlike procedural-oriented programming where functions were given importance. Here data is given importance. Like in real world problems, data are very important. So this is the major difference between procedural-oriented programming and object-oriented programming. You'll see that, and how we can hide data. It could be it will be done through some mechanisms in object-oriented programming languages. Like this is one of the mechanism. This is what you call private. Private is one access specifier in C++ language. We'll be using this access specifier in order to hide data. And hiding data means hiding the data from accessing, being accessed by some other objects of another class. And then we have access specifiers public, which will be dealing in the later chapters. Then we have the concept of encapsulation, which means combining of data and functions together. When we combine data and functions, because this is the main idea. When you have a class, inside the class we combine data and functions together, and functions are those functions which will be working on those data. So that will that gives the concept of encapsulation. Then we have inheritance. As we know, inheritance means when deriving one of the feature from your parents to the descendants. Reusability is very important. The concept of reusability means if we write one function in one class, those functions can be used in another class, which we don't have to again redefine. Then we will come to the concept of polymorphism and overloading. Polymorphism means one name different functions. Like we can use plus operator to do integer addition, string addition, like that. Those things, okay, we will discuss in details. So okay, what is the most important takeaway from what we have discussed so far is the differences between procedural-oriented programming and object-oriented programming is that Data is given very much importance in object-oriented programming. In procedure-oriented programming, the data was not given importance. Only functions were given importance. This is one thing that you'll have to be very, very, uh, clear that in procedure-oriented programming, data was not given much importance. Only functions were given importance. If you have to see a problem in procedural oriented programming, then it would be in the form of functions. So a big problem was broken down into small fragments by the rule of divide and conquer. So a big problem divided into small fragments, and these small fragments consisted of functions and data. And then we have global data there, and then these global data were very much vulnerable to changes by all the functions that we have in the program. But such is not the case of object-oriented programming. In object-oriented programming, data is hidden, and we have discussed that data are hidden through the mechanism of access specifiers, and each class and objects will have their own data. uh, One class having some particular one object having particular data will not be accessible to other objects of other classes. So this is the main takeaway. Like if you are to know the major difference between procedural oriented programming and object oriented programming, why we need object oriented programming, of course, number of reasons. Apart from that, number one being clear, more it provides clear modular structure for programs. Modular structures, models. Every program is divided into modules. So it'll give you so that your program can be broken down into modules. When your program is broken down into modules, it is easily solvable. uh, we have another advantage that it can be easily maintained and modified. uh, this is another reason is it provides uh, a huge scope for code libraries. Like when you include we include a lot of libraries from uh, you know uh, the softwares that come along with that program. Then like for example, you could use libraries for string operations by including files. Those features are there. And then we have code reusability. Of course, this is a very important feature of the advantage of object-oriented reusability. uh, is something, from the name itself, we can reuse the code, and it's a very flexible in object oriented programming. Though we do have the concept of reusability in procedure oriented as well, but the uh, uh, features, the facility is much enhanced in object oriented programming. Then we have very major advantages. It can be used to solve real world problems, and we have already described. Then we can see the difference which we've already discussed. Every problem in procedure oriented programming is viewed in terms of functions, whereas in OOPS it is in terms of objects. It's a top-down approach and it is a bottom-up approach. Top-down means, see, in procedural oriented programming, and like in C language, you have already written programs where a program starts from the main function, and then we define the functions called in the main function outside the main function at the bottom. Whereas in object-oriented programming approach, what we do is we start defining classes, and at the bottom we write the main function. So these are the differences. We can easily go through it. I'm not going to explain. uh, then these are the examples you can see in procedural programming. We have C, Fortran, Pascal, Basics. These are all the examples of procedural oriented programming language. Object oriented programming language: C++, Java, Python is a very good language. C hash. These are the languages which follows object-oriented programming concept. Now, to wind up, one last thing that you'll have to understand is the difference between object based language and OOPS, because there might be some confusion between these two approaches. Both object-based language and OOPS are programming language approaches. So though they may be similar because both are object-oriented, but there is a difference. The difference is in object-based languages, we may not follow inheritance or polymorphism of both the features. Like we have seen in object-oriented programming, this polymorphism and inheritance happens to be one of the major feature of this programming approach. But we don't follow that approach in object-based programming language. This is the main difference between object-based language and object-oriented language. These are what some of the examples of object-based languages. I hope if you're aware of, you must have heard JavaScript, Visual Basic programming languages. These are the languages which follow the concept of object-based language. So these are the object-based languages. Then all this C hash, Java, C++, VB.NET, they are all object-oriented languages. So this is what you have to keep in mind. Then this is the conclusion of this, the basic of object-oriented programming. There are a lot of things that we need to know, but this is what is the basics behind object-oriented programming language. So I hope I've been able to make you clear, and if there are any queries, you can please let me know. Thank you.